Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an unbelievable and breathtaking story. Let's meet Sable Thorne, a teacher who remained clinically dead for a staggering 33 minutes and 27 seconds and returned with powerful revelations from Jesus about the true hidden power of prayer, what she saw on the other side, and how every prayer can literally destroy spiritual strongholds will leave you speechless. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense and transformative journey. My name is Sable Thorne. I'm 42 years old, and I'm an elementary school teacher in Burlington, Vermont. When someone asks me what changed my life, I answer without hesitation, prayer. But I'm not referring to those quick, automatic prayers I used to say before going to sleep, asking for protection or giving superficial thanks for the day. I'm talking about true prayer, the one that became a powerful spiritual weapon after my near-death experience. It all happened on March 20th, 2024. It was an ordinary Wednesday at Green Mountain Elementary School. Winter was still present, and the children wore heavy coats, leaving trails of melted snow in the hallways. That morning, I taught a lesson on the cycles of nature, explaining how even the harshest winter gave way to spring. I remember making a comparison with our own lives, telling the children that, even in difficult times, hope was always reborn. After class, I released the students for recess and went to the teacher's room. I picked up my lunchbox, but felt suddenly dizzy. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Maybe it was just tiredness or the fact that I hadn't had breakfast. However, when the pressure in my chest increased, something inside me knew it wasn't just hunger. I tried to lean on the hallway wall, but my legs gave way and everything went dark. The last thing I heard were children's voices in the distance, mixed with the hurried sound of Amelia Grant's footsteps, my best friend and co-worker. She screamed my name before everything went dark. At that moment, as my body lay inert on the cold school floor, my soul began a journey that would change not only my life, but also the lives of everyone around me. When I lost consciousness, the world around me fell apart like a painting blurred by rain. There was no pain, just a complete absence of sensation. It was as if I had stepped through a curtain of absolute silence. My last physical memory was the cold of the hallway floor against my skin and the distant sound of children playing outside. But suddenly, everything changed. I didn't experience the tunnel of light that so many people talk about. For me, it was as if I had been gently pulled out of my own body, through an invisible veil. The environment around me was no longer the school hallway. I found myself in a large space, which could not be described as just a place. There was a tangible presence of peace, and the air seemed to vibrate with a soft, welcoming energy. The setting was a surreal mix of familiarity and mystery. I was in a lush green field, with a golden light that didn't come from any visible sun. The colors were more intense than anything my human eyes could capture. The sound of the wind in the leaves created a delicate melody, and every step I took seemed to echo in my soul. As I walked, a figure appeared in the distance. Even before I saw him clearly, my heart, or what was left of my essence, already knew who he was. Jesus was walking towards me. His presence was overwhelming and, at the same time, incredibly welcoming. His face radiated light, but not a blinding light. It was a light that filled the empty spaces inside me. His eyes had an infinite depth, as if they carried all the pain and all the loves in the world. He didn't need to speak for me to understand that I was safe, but still, his voice echoed through the room, soft and firm. Sable, you were brought here to see what earthly eyes cannot see. What you learn here will change your life and help many others. Hearing his words, a wave of peace washed over me. I knew I was about to witness something extraordinary, something that needed to be shared with the world. Jesus reached out his hand to me, and when he touched it, I was immediately transported to a completely different scenario. The serene landscape of the lush green field disappeared, and I found myself in an environment that resembled a battlefield. There were dark fortresses in the distance, towering walls built from twisted blocks of dark, oppressive matter. These structures surrounded specific areas, as if they wanted to imprison or isolate something precious. As I got closer, I realized that each of those strongholds represented areas of my own life. One of them, shrouded in thick shadow, represented my wedding. Another, with black thorns that moved like snakes, symbolized my relationship with my students. There was a fortress filled with sad echoes, which I understood to represent my own insecurities and fears. Jesus walked beside me, and even in the midst of that dark scenario, his light was not drowned out. He pointed to one of the walls, and suddenly, as if watching a movie, I saw a scene from my childhood. I was kneeling next to my bed, my little hands clasped together, praying before I went to sleep. I must have been about 6 years old. At the time, it was just an innocent prayer from a child, asking God to take care of Mom and Dad. But in the spiritual world, that prayer took shape. My words turned into an arrow of light that passed through the wall, creating a gigantic crack in the demonic construction. The creatures that worked there, deformed shadows, their faces twisted with hate, stirred. Some tried to cover the crack, others retreated, hissing as if the light was burning them. Jesus then showed me other scenes. Prayers said in desperation during my teenage years, when my mother passed away. Prayers muttered silently as I looked at my students during morning roll call, and even the simplest prayers said while driving to work. Each of them had a real impact on that place. Some caused small cracks, others real explosions of light. He explained to me that his name carried a special power. When a prayer was said in the name of Jesus, its effect was multiplied. The fortresses shook, and the demons, who had previously acted with confidence, began to panic. I could hear their murmurs, their attempts to create new barriers. They whispered distractions, planted doubts and exhaustion, all to keep us from praying. I felt small in the face of that revelation. Throughout my life, I have thought so many times that my prayers were no more than the ceiling. But there, before me, was proof that every word spoken in faith was like a ray of light in the midst of darkness. As I took in every detail of that vision, Jesus led me to an even deeper place in the spiritual realm. Now, we were in a war room of sorts. Around a dark, twisted table, demons gathered like generals planning a battle. Their forms were dark, almost nondescript, but each carried a specific aura of malignancy. Some exuded exhaustion, others carried with them the cloak of doubt, and there were those who seemed masters at creating subtle distractions. I watched as they debated strategies. Ethereal maps floated on the table, showing moments from my own daily life. I saw the image of myself waking up in the morning, tiredness weighing on my shoulders before I even got out of bed. I saw the countless times I got distracted by my cell phone, by daily tasks, by small worries that seemed huge. They celebrated every time I chose not to pray. Every moment I let myself get carried away by the rush of life without connecting with God. "We need to keep her mind busy," said one of the shadows, his voice like the sound of dry leaves crunching. "If she realizes the power of prayer, everything will be lost." Another demon, whose form seemed to constantly change, like a mirage, added, "Introduce subtle doubts. Make her question whether God really hears her. And if she starts praying, bring distractions. Ring the phone, make the dog bark. Bring unfinished tasks to mind." I felt vulnerable. It was as if they were spying on my most intimate moments, manipulating my thoughts. But Jesus, at my side, radiated an unshakable calm. "They are afraid of one thing," he said, his eyes reflecting compassion and strength. "Their greatest fear is a believer who understands the true power of prayer." To demonstrate, he just whispered a short prayer. Immediately, the war room was filled with intense light. The demons dissipated like smoke in the wind. Their strategies, maps and plans disintegrated before my eyes. It was as if a purifying wind had swept away all that evil. When you pray, Sable, the sky moves, the enemy trembles. Even the simplest prayer, when said in faith, is a powerful weapon. Those words were engraved in my soul. I understood, in a way I never had before, that every time I connected with God in prayer, I wasn't just speaking into the void. I was fighting, creating impact, moving the spiritual world. Jesus then led me to a place where darkness had no access. It was as if we were in a fortress of light, where the air vibrated with a constant celestial melody. From all sides, I saw luminous beings, each one shining with its own intensity. They were angels, and each one carried a sword of light, ready for battle. Unlike the serene and peaceful images I knew, these angels had a warrior stance, a determination that overflowed in their expressions. They were not standing still. All around me I saw them moving quickly, answering prayers like soldiers answering orders. A prayer from a distressed mother caused an angel to fall upon a shadow that tried to surround her son. Another prayer, simple and silent, said by an elderly man in an empty church pew, shot like an arrow, and angels lined up around that man, creating a protective shield. As I watched this spiritual movement, Jesus spoke to me. Sable, with each prayer, the sky moves. The angels just wait for a word of faith to act. Nothing is too small to take to the Father. When you pray, you mobilize armies. He showed me specific scenes from my own life. I remembered one morning when, as I walked to school, I said a short prayer asking for protection for my students. In the physical world, nothing extraordinary happened that day, but in the spiritual world, I saw how my simple prayer brought angels to every classroom, driving away shadows that whispered fear and discouragement in children's ears. In another vision, I saw angels next to my family. When David and I prayed together, our home was filled with light, creating a barrier against the spiritual forces that tried to sow discord in our marriage. There was even a moment when Jesus took me out of the bubble of light in which we were. I could see Burlington from above, the busy streets, people coming and going. But beyond the physical plane, there was an ongoing battle. Angels and demons fought around people. Some carried heavy spiritual burdens. Shadows followed them, whispering lies and despair. Others, surrounded by the light of prayer, walked as if protected by an invisible shield. My heart was filled with compassion. Jesus made me understand that every prayer, even those we consider small or insignificant, was a call to heaven, and that the angels, always ready to act, were just waiting for this gap of faith to intervene in our lives. The next vision was, perhaps, the most impactful of all. Jesus took me to a space where time seemed to flow differently. I could see my entire life, not just as a linear timeline, but as a complex tapestry, where each prayer point was a shining knot woven into a divine pattern. The most surprising thing was realizing that the prayers had no time limit. Jesus showed me a specific prayer that my mother said when I was still a child. She was kneeling next to my bed one night. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but his words carried immense spiritual weight. At that moment, my mother asked God that I would be protected, that my faith would never waver, that I would find my purpose in the world. The most amazing thing was to see that this prayer, even years after his death, still echoed in the spiritual realm. It was as if her every word kept traveling, like ripples on a calm lake, touching the dark fortresses that tried to rise around me and tearing them apart. As I watched, I saw a dark fortress crumble. It was a spiritual barrier that had enveloped me for years, fueling my feelings of insecurity as a teacher. I always thought my quick morning prayers didn't have much effect, but Jesus showed me how even these brief moments of sincerity created cracks in the walls of darkness. He explained that the quality of prayer was much more important than the quantity. A long but empty prayer had little impact, but a short prayer, said with an open heart and in his name, caused an explosion of light in the spiritual world. Jesus also allowed me to see how essential other people's prayers for me were during my near-death experience. I saw Amelia, my friend, holding my hand as the paramedics tried to revive me. Even without knowing what to do, she murmured simple words, "God, bring her back. Don't take her yet." That prayer, so full of love and despair, resounded like thunder in the sky. The angels that protected me during the reanimation process were activated by her faith. While my body lay still, my soul was surrounded by the light of the prayers of those who loved me. This revelation brought tears to my eyes. I realized that we often underestimate the power we have when bending our knees. Every sincere prayer is an act of spiritual warfare, and every word is a flame that lights the way for heaven to intervene in our reality. As I assimilated the eternal power of prayers, Jesus took me to a kind of spiritual auditorium. It was a dark, oppressive place, where shadows moved like snakes across the floor. In the center, a contorted-looking demonic figure was leading a meeting. Smaller demons, each representing a specific tactic, sat around a table. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the air itself was poisoned. I was not seen by them, but I could clearly hear their voices. The leader, with eyes like hot coals, began to speak. She went back to praying. "We need to stop her." One of the demons, whose form was amorphous, stood up. His voice was like the sound of breaking glass. "Yesterday, we launched distractions. We made the phone ring. We created emergencies at school." She barely prayed, but even her few words did damage. Another demon, this one with long fingers that twitched endlessly, reported his progress. I made her feel exhausted. I whispered in her ear that she was too tired to pray, and when she tried, I brought to her mind all the unfinished tasks. It worked for a while, but she persisted and prayed anyway. The demonic leader slammed the table, and the sound reverberated like thunder. Every day without prayer is a victory for us. If we continue like this, we will be able to maintain the fortresses built around her and her family. I felt exposed, vulnerable. It felt like all my moments of weakness and doubt were used as ammunition against me. But then Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and the feeling of peace immediately returned. See, Sable, how desperate they get when someone prays. They know that even the smallest prayer can destroy their plans. This is why they try so hard to stop my children from praying. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. A soft light began to shine in the corner of the room. It was a representation of a simple prayer, said by a child before going to sleep. That light expanded, taking shape and transforming into an angelic figure. With a single movement, the angel spread that light throughout the room, and the demons scattered, screaming and writhing. The dark war room was dismantled in the blink of an eye. Where there were once shadows and despair, now there was only light. Jesus looked me in the eye, and his expression was both loving and urgent. Never doubt the power of prayer. Your every word has the power to move heaven and earth, and the enemy knows this. That vision impressed on my soul the seriousness of the spiritual battle around us. Understanding that demons fear our prayers more than anything else completely changed my stance. I knew that when I returned to my body, I needed to share this truth with as many people as possible. After the revelation about the enemy's tactics, Jesus led me to a much more welcoming vision. We were now in an ordinary home, but the atmosphere was completely different. I could see a family gathered in the living room, holding hands, praying before a meal. There was a soft light around them, like an invisible cloak that covered everyone. It was a simple prayer, giving thanks for the food and asking for protection. In the physical world, it seemed like a common ritual, but in the spiritual world, it was an impenetrable barrier against darkness. Jesus explained to me that family prayers created a spiritual covering, a kind of shield that demons could not easily penetrate. It was as if each family member was a part of a wall, and together they formed a fortress. He showed how the demons tried to approach him, but were repelled by the light of prayer. It was impossible not to notice the contrast. While in the physical world people barely noticed what was happening, in the spiritual world, it was a real battle. Afterwards, the scene changed to a local church. A group of people were gathered in corporate prayer. Voices came together, some low, others exalted, but all filled with faith. Angels marched around the building, like guards on a tower. The shadows, which previously roamed the city, kept their distance, unable to get closer. I then saw a specific moment in my own school. I remembered when I suggested a short prayer before a teacher meeting. For many, it seemed like just a gesture of respect, but in the spiritual world, I saw how it strengthened the spiritual defenses of the environment. Angels were positioned in the hallways, and a light rested over each classroom. Jesus showed me how community prayer had a multiplier effect. When 2 or more people prayed together, the spiritual impact was exponential. Entire fortresses crumbled, demons were forced to retreat, and once dark areas were filled with light. Family and community prayer creates deep spiritual roots. Sable, she not only protects those who pray, but also bears fruit for those around her. It is a source of strength that the enemy cannot easily break. I felt challenged and at the same time encouraged. I realized that my mission was not just to pray alone, but also to encourage those around me to do the same. Prayer should become part of everyday life, not as an obligation, but as a powerful weapon and a source of continuous protection. The next vision was deeply personal and challenging. Jesus took me to a place where time didn't seem to matter. I could see scenes from my own daily life, seemingly insignificant moments that now carried immense spiritual weight. I found myself rushing around in the mornings, preparing coffee for my family, checking Sophia's school materials, trying to answer work messages on my cell phone. It was in these small moments that the enemy found gaps. Jesus showed me how, on several occasions, I felt the gentle invitation to pray, a gentle impression on my mind, like a whisper, "Talk to me." However, I often ignored this feeling, overwhelmed by rush and responsibilities. It wasn't out of rebellion or disbelief, but simply because I let myself be carried away by the frenetic pace of everyday life. "See how I've always been here, waiting for you," Jesus said, his voice carrying a tone of deep patience. Even when you had no words, I listened to your heart. But when you chose to talk to me, even if just for a second, the impact was huge. He showed me a specific situation, a morning when I was especially stressed, racing against the clock. I remember stopping for a brief moment, closing my eyes and saying in a low voice, "Lord, help me." This prayer, so short and almost involuntary, caused an impressive movement in the spiritual world. Angels positioned themselves around me, dispelling shadows that surrounded me, bringing unexpected peace. But Jesus also revealed to me the times when I succumbed to distractions. There were days when I felt the urge to pray, but would soon be diverted by a notification on my cell phone, a sudden worry, or a feeling of tiredness. Each of these times was a missed opportunity, a small victory for the enemy. I saw how the demons rejoiced when prayer was left aside, how they quickly reorganized and tried to surround areas of my life. Yet even in those moments, Jesus never gave up on me. He showed me sitting next to me, waiting patiently, offering his hand. He didn't judge me for my unsaid prayer, but he always encouraged me to try again. His patience was infinite, his love unconditional. The lesson was clear. Persistence in prayer was not about perfection, but about intention. Even when the world seemed to conspire to keep me from that moment of connection, every effort was valued. I understood that even a simple and hasty prayer, when said sincerely, had the power to move heaven, and that Jesus, always loving, was just waiting for an invitation to act in my life. Suddenly, I felt like I was being pulled back. The sensation was as if my soul was being gently pushed into my body. The celestial scenery began to fade, and the deep peace was replaced by the gradual awareness of my physical body. The sound of beeping machines, muffled voices, and the coldness of the hospital environment enveloped me. My eyes blinked slowly, and the first image I saw was the white, fluorescent ceiling of the emergency room. The air was heavy, thick with the sterile smell of antiseptics. It took me a few seconds to realize I was back. At first, everything seemed surreal, as if I were in two worlds at once. My heart, which had remained still for 33 minutes and 27 seconds, was now beating steadily, bringing me back to reality. Beside me, I saw the doctor, Thomas Whitmore, still holding the defibrillator electrodes. His expression was a mix of shock and relief. He seemed in disbelief that after so long, my heart had started beating again without any apparent damage. Nurses around stopped the procedures, some with tears in their eyes, as if they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Sable," the doctor's voice was hoarse. Are you back?" I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a weak whisper. Still, I managed to mutter, "I was with him." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Nobody knew exactly what to say. Amelia Grant, my friend and co-worker, was there. His eyes were red, and his hands shook slightly as he held mine. She told me later that throughout the resuscitation process, she never stopped praying. His words, although simple, were like a thread of hope that connected heaven to earth. Doctors began carrying out tests. I should have suffered irreversible brain damage after so long without adequate oxygenation, but all the results were normal. There were no physical consequences. The medical team was stunned, trying to explain what was clearly inexplicable. As they searched for scientific answers, I knew in my heart that this was a miracle. I had been sent back for a reason. The mission that Jesus entrusted to me still echoed in my soul, sharing what I saw, what I learned, and the transformative power of prayer. Even in the clinical environment, my spirit still vibrated with the spiritual truth that had been revealed to me. The recovery was quick, almost miraculous. Within a few days, I was walking down the hospital corridor, feeling the cold ground beneath my feet, but with a lightness in my soul that I had never experienced before. There was no pain, there was no confusion, just absolute clarity about what I needed to do from now on. My first conversations were with those around me. The nurse who brought my food listened to my story with tears in her eyes. She herself was a woman of faith and said that, while taking care of me, she felt a different presence in the room, as if the environment itself was filled with peace. The doctor, Thomas Whitmore, even though he was skeptical, he started asking me deeper questions. Initially, his questions were technical, seeking to understand what I had seen during clinical death, but he soon became carried away by spiritual curiosity. He asked me about Jesus, about the visions of prayers, and although he would never admit it, I knew that something in him was changing too. When I finally returned home, I was greeted by David and Sophia with tight hugs. My daughter, who had prayed so hard for me, seemed different. There was a flame in his eyes, a reflection of the light I had seen in the spirit world. She told me that during my time in the hospital, she began to pray every day. At first, they were just words spoken in fear, but over time, she began to feel a welcoming presence during her prayers. That first night home, we gathered in the living room. David suggested that we pray together. It wasn't a long prayer, but it was full of sincerity. As I closed my eyes and listened to my family's voices, I saw in my mind the light spreading throughout our home, chasing away any remaining shadows. It was the beginning of a new routine. We began to pray before meals, before bed, and especially in difficult times. Returning to school was another challenge. Word of my experience spread quickly, and many colleagues were curious. Some, like Amelia, received my story with openness. Others, not so much. I knew that not everyone would understand, but my purpose was not to convince, but to share. I began including silent prayers in the classroom, asking for protection and wisdom for my students, and, surprisingly, the environment began to change. More agitated children calmed down, conflicts subsided, and even other teachers noticed a lighter atmosphere. My view of prayer had completely changed. Before, I saw it as a simple religious practice, almost a habit. Now, I knew that every word spoken in faith was a spiritual weapon. When I prayed, I imagined demonic strongholds crumbling, angels acting, the light of Jesus illuminating every dark corner. My story wasn't just about surviving a near-death experience. It was about understanding that even in the simplicity of a prayer, there was power, and this power was available to everyone, waiting only for a sincere heart and a word of faith. Even after I returned to my daily life, Jesus' words continued to echo in my mind. Every prayer has value. Even the smallest prayer, when prayed in faith, is like a ray of light in the midst of darkness. I knew this message was not just for me, but for everyone who crossed my path. Soon, opportunities began to arise. I was invited to give my testimony in small prayer groups, then in local churches, and eventually even in community meetings. At first, I was afraid. It wasn't easy to share something so profound and often out of the ordinary. But every time I felt insecure, I closed my eyes and prayed. I imagined the divine light surrounding me, driving away the shadows of doubt, and it worked. With each account, I saw people being touched, some crying, others coming to me afterwards to share their own spiritual experiences or doubts. At school, changes continued. Some teachers began meeting before classes to pray for the safety and well-being of students. It was not an imposed movement, but something natural, which grew as my testimony spread. One of the most striking stories was that of a student named Emily, a reserved girl who was going through family difficulties. One morning, I felt a strong impression to pray for her, even though I didn't know the details of her situation. That same week, she came to me and said that somehow she felt safer at school, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. At home, our home has become a true spiritual refuge. David, who previously viewed prayer as just a religious ritual, began leading our family prayers. Sophia, now with a renewed faith, invited friends to spend the night, and always started conversations about the importance of talking to God. Our meals were preceded by prayers not only of gratitude but also of intercession for others. My message was clear. Prayer was not a bargaining chip with the divine, but a real conversation, a powerful weapon against darkness. Whenever someone asked me about what I had learned, I repeated what Jesus showed me. The enemy's tactics were based on making us doubt, distracting us, and exhausting us. But persistence in prayer was like a spiritual resistance that drove away darkness and brought in light. I became a messenger, but not on my own merit. All I did was share what I had seen and experienced. And in every conversation, lecture, or simple exchange of words, I felt the presence of Jesus at my side, smiling, encouraging and reinforcing the truth that each prayer has a real and lasting impact. As time went by, my routine returned to normal, but my spiritual vision would never be the same. I returned to teaching, but now my classroom was more than a place for academic teaching. It became a space of light, where each day was an opportunity to bless children not only with knowledge, but also with silent prayers and positive intentions. I prayed for each student as I called out their names on the attendance list, and the impact was visible. Children who previously had difficulty concentrating seemed calmer, and even small conflicts between peers began to diminish. My testimony continued to reach more people. Churches, prayer groups, and even informal coffee shop meetings became stages for sharing what I had seen and learned. Whenever I talked about my experience, I felt the presence of Jesus at my side, as if he reinforced every word I said. There were times when I could almost hear his voice next to mine, especially when he spoke about the power of prayer and how every prayer, even the simplest, had the power to move the sky and shake the darkness. Jesus' final message, the one he entrusted to me during my near-death experience, was clear. Every prayer has value. Even the smallest prayer, when prayed in faith, is like a ray of light in the midst of darkness. I look forward to hearing every prayer, ensuring that each one has a real impact. These words became the core of my testimony. I wanted everyone to understand that regardless of the situation, the time available, or the words chosen, God always listened. Over time, my mission expanded. I was asked to write a short book about my experience, not to promote my story, but to reach those who might never have the chance to hear me in person. The book was titled, The Prayer That Shakes the Invisible, and to my surprise, it touched many lives. I received letters and messages from people who, inspired by the story, began to pray again. Many after years of spiritual separation. The transformation in my own life was profound. My marriage grew stronger, my daughter grew up with a strong faith, and my school became a place of peace and protection. But the biggest victory was seeing people around me, who were previously lost or unmotivated, discover the power of prayer. My purpose since then has been clear: to continue sharing what I experienced, encouraging others to pray and keeping the flame of faith burning. And every time I kneel or simply close my eyes and murmur a prayer, I know I'm not alone. I know that my voice echoes in the sky, and that each word is a seed of light planted in the midst of darkness. My final message is an invitation. Pray. No matter how simple or short your prayer is, it has power. And Jesus, with his infinite patience and love, is always ready to listen. Don't waste this opportunity. Every prayer is a chance to bring heaven to earth, to transform lives and to combat the forces of darkness. And most of all, it is a way to connect with divine love, which is always waiting, always present, and eternally faithful. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.